I think we keep going back to technology. We still need the human touch. We need the human element. And I think that we can't get away from that. So let's just come back to center, right? And start to rework that, because we'll have a better future of work when we get back to the humanity of the workplace.
If I needed to choose between self-advocacy, trust, and courageous leadership as the most important thing for ambitious introverts, I would struggle, because all of them are clearly vital in the current workplace environment. But lucky for me, and for you guys listening, we don't have to choose, because today I'm talking to Minda Harts, and she's an expert on all three of them. Minda has worked with Fortune 100 and 500 companies to create empowering workplace cultures. She is the author of the best-selling book, The Memo, which has been turned into a screenplay. And her new book, Talk to Me Nice, focuses on restoring trust in the workplace, which is an absolutely critical issue right now. Minda is an assistant professor of public service at NYU's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School. She has been recognized as LinkedIn's #1 voice in the workplace 2020. She's one of Business Insider's top 100 people transforming business. I could go on and on and on. But the main thing you need to know about Minda is, as well as these amazing accomplishments, she is also a huge introvert, just like me. So it was such a pleasure to be able to have this conversation with her and hear all about her expertise, and also hear her take on being an introvert in such a public role as motivational speaking. So we are talking mainly about trust, and Minda sharing from her new book why trust is crucial for workplace productivity and retention, but is often really overlooked. She's sharing some of the 7 trust languages that she's developed to improve workplace communication. She's talking about how introverts can thrive by understanding their needs and advocating for themselves, and knowing what kind of trust is required for us to feel good and safe in the workplace. And we also talk about dialogue in the workplace and how to start conversations about trust and how it can lead to positive change. And as I say, Minda is sharing all of this as well through the lens of someone who is an ambitious introvert and totally gets what it's like to be that person who maybe doesn't feel like they fit the typical mold of the outgoing workspace, but know that they have something important to say and that they have excellent work to deliver. So I hope that you'll enjoy this interview with the amazing Minda Harts as much as I enjoyed recording it. And I will pop Minda's book link in the show notes if you want to learn more about how trust can have a positive impact on your career or your organization. Minda, welcome to the Ambitious Introvert, which I know you are one of them.
I am. I wear my badge very proudly, Emma-Louise.
So I'm not sure if you know this, but the first time I came across you in your work, you were speaking on a panel, and I was in the audience, and you were speaking about being a rapid growth thought leader. And there was yourself, Laura Gassner-Otting, and Rachel D'Alto. And I don't know what question they asked you, but the first thing you said was, "Oh, I'm a huge introvert." I was like, okay,
that.
I need Minda on the podcast, like noted, and then learn about the work that you do. And I was like, I definitely need her on the podcast. Is that something that you've always identified with, even through your professional career?
I did. I didn't always, I think, have the language for it, right? But early in my career, I realized that there were people who were definitely more vocal than me, right? In meetings, and more outgoing, and kind of wanted to be the life of the party, even at work. And I'm like, you know what? That's just not who I am. And even on those moments where I felt like I needed to be that, it just never felt authentic. And I'm like, you know what? There has to be a space for us, those who can still be strategic and use our voice strategically, and not have to be the one shutting down karaoke night, right?
It's interesting about having the language. And I think that's true for myself and for a lot of my clients as well, where you feel like you're a little bit othered because you don't want to be maybe, like you say, going out and living it up. And for me, I was a flight attendant when I very first left school. And we would go, all over the world, and it was amazing. I was like 18 years old. And the first night we got anywhere, we would go out and we would party, and it was great. And the second night, I would sit in my room with, takeaway pizza and watch HBO and be like, I just don't want to talk to anyone for the next 24 hours. And that was my understanding of it. It's like, well, I like people and I like being sociable, but I also need to balance that with like, don't talk to me.
I love that how you put that, because I resonate with that so much, because all the jobs that I've had required me to be very social, right? And then I'd realize that, wow, at the end of the day, I didn't want to talk on the phone to my friends or my family, because I was just like, my cup was empty, but I didn't I didn't have the language to say, oh, wait, you just need some time to put the battery pack back in. You just need some time to collect your thoughts, have some me time. And I think sometimes people can take that as rude or shy or, all of these different things. And I think back to having the language for it, understanding that, oh, I'm not alone. There are other people who want to be social, right? Functioning, but also need that time to just decompress.
Yeah, there's a huge difference between taking that time to recharge and isolating.
Yeah.
And I think there's that fine line where people say, oh, you need to get out more and you need to do this. And knowing that, no, actually, I'm just like, charge my battery and I'm going to be all good.
You're going to want this version of me when I'm charged.
Yeah, just you wait. Just give me another 2 hours and then I'm back. So let's stick on the introversion for a while, because I think you're going to have some really interesting insights, because as I said earlier, I watched you on a panel which was for rapid growth thought leaders, and you did grow very rapidly from, being in your job and leaving your job to writing the memo to everything that came with that, with speaking, workplace consulting, like all of the things, another 2 books since, a short film. Like I was reading your website and I'm like, oh my gosh, she just keeps going in really a short space of time, like a few years, half a decade.
Yeah.
So many questions with that, but how do you feel now as a busy but self-employed person running a company? Does that enable you to manage your energy better than when you were employed?
That's a great question. And the answer is capital Y-E-S. Yes, I have to, because I feel like now being, I guess, a thought leader, an author, a speaker, there's so much required of me in one day, right? I might, now that we do a lot of virtual events, I might do 2 or 3 talks in one day on some days, right? And then an interview, or have to do a LinkedIn Live. And so I'm really like, oh, wow, by the end of the day, I am spent, right? And so for me, I have to say, okay, what are the things that I can put in place, boundaries essentially, that help me get that momentum back, right? And I really had to be kind to myself and gentle to myself to say, in order to be your best version of yourself, Minda, you're going to have to create this time. So for example, one of the things I do in my schedule, like Tuesdays, for example, is where I try to take the majority of my meetings. So I kind of knock those out in 1 week. And if I'm on 3 back-to-back video calls, I tell my assistant, you know what, the next 2 need to be just old school phone calls, because I need a minute to not show my face. I need, and all those sorts of things. And so I used to be a little apologetic, because some people would get on video or get on a old school conference call and be like, oh, I thought this was a video. And I said, well, if I have a lot of videos during the day, part of my self-care is a phone call. And they're like, wow, that's great. You give yourself permission to do that. And I'm like, okay, great. People can understand the boundaries that we set. And I shouldn't be apologetic for the things that I need in my day to help me feel full, right? And not depleted, because I want to give my best at my job. And I just realized that for me, there's going to be a few more tips and tricks and hacks that I'm going to need that someone else may be able to go full throttle. And that's okay. Right.
And it's so true, because there is such a thing as Zoom fatigue, as most of us learned during the pandemic. And when, in this line of work that we're doing, we do spend a lot of time in front of the screens. And I had a similar experience with 2 of my closest friends live overseas, and we've got a time zone difference. And we found that we just weren't connecting. We weren't, we were texting, voice note, but we weren't getting to connect synchronously. And we realized that we just didn't want to sit in front of a screen. So we just started talking on WhatsApp, like a normal phone call, because we can do that for free internationally. And we were like, why didn't we do this earlier? This is great. I can go out for a walk, or I can, sit in bed and we can chat. Whereas it felt like this whole performance and production of like, I've got to get in front of the screen.
That part. So I do a lot of voice notes with my friends because that feels good to me, right? And then when they really need to talk to the phone or need a video, then, they're like, this one has to be a FaceTime. I'm like, okay, I can do that, but we don't have to make everyone a FaceTime.
You're like, yeah, you've got one in the bank. That's okay. I've got the energy for you.
Yeah.
So in your earlier work, like the memo, one of the things you touched on a lot was self-advocacy as a woman of color. Do you think your introversion impacted on that too? You said about how you noticed a lot of people were louder. Looking back, do you think it had a negative impact?
That's a great question. I think for me, again, the balance, I think of being in my former life in a 9 to 5, I was the only woman of color in my office. And so I think too, battling like, how do I show up like everybody else who may be a little more like vocal, adventurous, extroverts, and then also not being too of anything, right? Because then there's those stereotypes of, Black and brown people being too loud or too this. And so I felt like I was playing, like I was always in this kind of psychological thriller in my mind. Like, when is the time to like use my voice, not use my voice, all those sorts of things. And at some point I just realized that I have to give myself permission to show up as Minda, taking all the labels, all the things, doing what's important to me. Now, do I need to show up and build relationships with people? Yes, I need to get out of my comfort zone and not just keep my head down and work hard and hope that people will see my work. People have to get to know me. But I also realize that I can do that in a way where I don't have to buy into any stereotypes. I don't have to, babysit someone else's biases. Like I can really figure out what the workplace could look like and should look like for me. And I realized that part of that was how I use my voice, how I show up, right? I do have control of that. And I think a lot of us get in a cycle in the workplace of trying to be like somebody else, right? Or trying to be someone else's expectations. And I used to have a colleague who would always say, you're not like the other fill in the blanks, right? And I just like, well, that's a good thing, right? I get to be me. And again, I think sometimes we just have so many expectations that we're trying to fill inside the workplace. And once I realized that I'm not here to fulfill anybody else's expectations, I took the power back.
I think that's such a great point you make because there's so much nuance. And I always think of it like layers. There are layers of things. Oh, you're a woman. So there's a layer there with speaking up. You're a woman of color. You're an introvert. You're the only woman in the office. We start to look at all of these different things. And the way you were describing, trying to navigate this of like, I don't want to be too much, but, I don't want to be not enough. It's exhausting. It sounds exhausting.
Because it is, right? I mean, even as, women in the workplace, I think we've all experienced or observed where our counterparts would say, oh, she's too loud. She's doing too much, and it's like, well, she's doing the same thing you're doing, but culturally now it's a problem, right? So it is these weird unwritten rules in the workplace. And I think that it was partially the reason why I sought out to do the work that I do is to say two things can be true at the same time. We could work at the same place, but we don't all experience that workplace the same. And how do we kind of level the playing field so that we understand the nuances, right, that show up in these ways?
My first quote unquote proper job, I was an air traffic controller before I started this business. And when I joined, my watch, I walked into the radar room and my watch had 85 people and I was the fourth woman out of 85. So it was just one, and I was 25 and I looked young at 25 as well. And it was very much, white, older male are the people that I'm working with and that are training me. It did change a lot in the 2 decades I was there. I think it became more like 25% female and much younger people. But I'd been in the workplace. I'd worked in airlines. I was fairly confident it was okay. But the disparity of it was huge. It was a little bit like, oh, okay, where do I fit here?
Yeah, absolutely.
So funnily enough, in aviation, one of the things that we used to talk about a lot, especially in training, is trust. About how, as an industry, you have to put your trust in so many people. Like pilots have to trust air traffic controllers. They have to trust people doing the refueling. They have to trust that the cabin crew are doing their job. Passengers have to trust that everything's going as it should. It's an incredibly trust an environment of people that are faceless quite often and that you don't see. What I love about your work with trust is that you're bringing it into, the conversations that we have in the teams we're working with, the people that lead us. What really sparked this off for you? What made you think this is important and I need to talk about it?
Yeah, thank you for talking about that because, like you said, in the aviation industry, there's a lot of faceless individuals, right? But that we rely on to make sure that we get from point A to point B. And one of the things that I realized after going to countless companies, talking with different people, when people would say that they don't trust their company or they don't trust who they work with, I realized there was a common theme. It wasn't necessarily that they didn't trust someone, but there was an expectation gap, right? A communication gap that maybe knowingly or unknowingly that wasn't being fulfilled or wasn't being articulated. Therefore, there was the trust breakdown, right? There was an erosion of trust. And yes, micromanaging erodes trust, but then also layoffs and reorgs. But what about not feeling psychological safety at workplace? That's an erosion of trust, right? Not having follow through from your manager when they keep saying that they're going to do this one thing and then it never happens, right? Or acknowledgement. You've been working on this project for the last 18 months and nobody said anything about it, right? And so maybe you don't trust the people you work with, not because they're bad people or they're out to get you, but because there's a lack in communication that you need. So what I realized was someone would say, okay, I don't trust, but I'm saying, oh, okay, well, if you had more feedback, would that enhance trust? Is that the core of what's really missing here? And so a lot of it is just miscommunication, right? Not articulating what you need from me and what I need from you. And so we have this expectation gap. We have more of this communication crisis. And I thought, okay, if we have a language to be able to ask for trust when it's not there or build it when it's, or restore it, then I feel like we could maybe have a better workplace, which statistics show that when trust is present, people are 21% more productive, 50% more retention, right? So trust isn't just a nice to have, it's good for business. And so I wanted to be able to kind of pull that back to the workplace and say, what happened to trusting each other? Because if we expect it in our romantic and platonic relationships, why wouldn't we expect it at a place we're going to spend 90,000 of our hours of our life?
I'm so glad you brought up those statistics about retention, because as you were talking, the thing that was going through my mind is, disengagement is at an all-time high for employees. And what you were describing is the reason that many people are disengaged. But like the introversion thing, I bet many people listening to this wouldn't necessarily have the language. They're not waking up in the morning and going, I don't trust my workplace, or I feel like there's a lack of trust. But when you start to describe, which we'll go into, the different trust languages and how it can be absent and what it looks like to be present, I think people will go, oh, that's why I feel this way. That's why, I feel a little bit reluctant to do that thing, or that's why, this person rubs me up the wrong way. They wouldn't have, I don't think they'd necessarily put it down to that, but I think it's going to really spark things for people.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that was, I'm like, what's underneath I don't trust someone? Right. And then I can't just come to you and say, hey, I don't trust you anymore. You're not going to respond well to me. It's going to create more conflict than was there. And oftentimes, I don't know about you, but a lot of times people don't even know that there was an erosion of trust. So now you're kind of upset and side-eyeing someone that they don't even know why you're upset.
It's correct. I remember a quote, and I'm going to say Gretchen Rubin, but if it's not, I apologize to whoever it was. Said, you are what you do, not what you say you'll do. Because quite often when people are talking a good talk, they believe they're doing something. So they'll be like, oh, I'm a great manager. Oh, I'm always listening to my employees. And that's the story. And they might fully believe that. But if you spoke to the employees, they're like, oh, he never listens. He's a terrible manager. And they're not actually following through and taking the actions. They're just saying the words.
Yeah. And I think that's like, especially now, I think in our workplaces, we really have to get back to trust because the workplace can't sustain without it, right? And I know that trust is subjective, right? And trust could be there at 9 a.m. and gone by 9:05. But if we're actively pursuing how to communicate better with each other, then I think that resets the trust clock every day. Trust is not a one-time demonstration. It has to be a lifestyle and a core value in our workplaces.
And like you say, it can drop because something can happen, because people have bad days, people make mistakes. But what I'm hearing you say is if there is a conversation and an awareness about it and a consistency, and people are, doing their best to be in integrity with trust, then you can ride that out and it's going to make the workplace better overall.
Yeah, because I'm going to trust you a little bit more, even if we've had a shaky track record. If you say, if I come to you and say, hey, I really need more feedback, I have these projects and I never know kind of where I stand with you. That's a conversation that if you're my manager, you could be like, okay, I could probably give you that if that's what you need, right? But if I don't know that's what you need, then you're going to keep not trusting me. We're going to have a low trust environment. And then also, if I know that feedback is a problem, or maybe I can ask you, if you report into me, hey, what do you need from me to do your best work? What does trust look like to you, right? Well, when you demonstrate your actions and you follow through with it, that creates a high trust environment. That's a better conversation than, I don't trust you. I think you hate me. You don't want me to be successful.
And it's a two-way street. Like you're saying, we have to advocate as well. So, the introverts obviously listening in that feel like, I don't want to speak up. Or, another common one that I hear is, but I shouldn't have to. I shouldn't have to ask for what I want. It should just be obvious, or everyone should treat everyone really well. But sometimes we do just need to say, hey, I need this.
Yeah, we have to normalize using our voice because everyone's busy. Nobody's going around with a crystal ball being, what do they want today? There's too many things going on. Like, just be an adult, tell me what you need. And at that point, even if you don't get what you need, at least no one could say, well, Minda never said that's what she needed from me. So I didn't know it was a problem,
As you know, I always say that your energy is your greatest asset as an introvert. Well, there is nothing that drains it faster than a restless, overheated night's sleep, especially in the summer. Here in the UK, we have been hitting temperatures of 30 plus degrees, which is 90 plus Fahrenheit, which in a country where homes don't have air conditioning has been brutal. However, I have been sleeping on cozy earth sheets made from viscose from bamboo, and the difference was instant. They are temperature regulating, which means they help your body to cool down naturally. Studies show that a cooler sleep environment actually helps to trigger melatonin production. So you not only fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer, but wake up way less foggy. And let's be honest, if you are anything like me, you're no fun to be around when you are sleep deprived, and you definitely don't perform at your best. Now, there's a reason that Cozy Earth gives you a 100-night sleep trial and a 10-year warranty. That is not just clever marketing. They know that once you try them, you will not want to sleep without them. So if you fancy your summer nights feeling as cool as a cucumber, go to cozyearth.com and use the code INTROVERT for a massive 40% off their best-selling bedsheets, loungewear, and more. That's cozyearth.com with code INTROVERT for 40% off. Sleep cooler, lounge lighter, stay cozy. So give us an overview of the trust. I love the trust languages because it reminds me of the love languages, which was one of the first personal development books I ever really got into. So, and I think languages are a great way for us to remember rather than just having like a checklist of things. It's like, oh yeah, I can actually see how, words of affirmation play out. So share with us what you discovered in your research.
Yeah. So shout out to the 5 love languages. They gave us so much in our cultural lexicon. And I thought, what are the languages for the workplace, right? What are the buckets that we need to feel seen, heard, and, affirmed? And it kind of came down to these 7 languages that I kept hearing people say they needed without saying it, right? And I'm like, well, what they're really saying is this. And so number 1 is transparency, right? Clarity and honesty in the workplace. Oh my God, what could that look like at work, right? Me to come to my manager and just say, hey, I need just a little more transparency on this. I know you can't give me everything that's going on, but even on when you can't, being transparent about, I don't have any information to provide, but you can trust that when it's time, I'm going to have your best interest at mind. That eases my nervous system just a bit to have even those conversations, right? Some of the other ones is security, demonstration, feedback, acknowledgement, sensitivity. Sensitivity, I think, is one right now, being mindful of our words and actions and how they land on other people, right? I'm not saying let's coddle everybody at work and let's baby everyone, but I'm saying let's be mindful of the things that we say, because it might be funny to me, but it might not be funny to somebody else, right? Or maybe we're in a very polarizing time in our country politically. So if I sit on one side of the aisle, maybe I don't make like, hey, I'm so happy this is going on, when maybe some of my team members feel a different way. I'm going to be more sensitive when we talk about political or, high stakes things, being a little more sensitive. And lastly, follow through, the consistency of keeping your word, not just a one-time action, but the consistency. And I feel like if we have more of that, we have the language to be able to say, I need X, Y, and Z. I believe we can be fluent in these languages in the workplace and have a space where we have less conflict and more productivity.
Let's touch on the feedback one, because we talked about that a little bit. And I think that one is huge for opening communication gateways. And to be devil's advocate, I know a lot of introverts don't necessarily want to seek feedback actively in case it's not what they want to hear. And a lot of us are quite sensitive souls, and even constructive criticism can feel very jarring to us. What advice would you give to someone who feels like that, but actually they know that really it would help them long term to begin in it?
Yeah, I think this is important. And to be fair, just like the 5 love languages, not all of us need quality time, right? So not all of us need feedback. But for those of us that do need that or could use it, it's that meaningful, consistent insight. And so going to meaningful, right? And then rooting it in facts and not feeling, right? So when we give someone feedback, it's not to hurt them or tear them down. It's to empower them, right? And so I feel like having feedback is important, but not just that, having a feedback loop. So having the exchange where we're actually having a conversation. So I think sometimes with our managers, it's feedback, but it's only a one-way communication street. But now that you've communicated A to me, then I get to communicate B to you. And then we come to a solution with C, right? So having that feedback loop, I think, is really important. And I think for us introverts and just those who might be a little more empathetic in the workplace, right, on certain things, I think that us taking feedback, like the old saying says, as a gift, right? What can you take out of this to say, hopefully this person is telling me this to make my work better, or I'm telling someone else this to make their work better, right? And so I think it's not what we say, but how we say it, but then giving someone else the opportunity to respond to what we said. I think that's the part that feedback lacks when we don't have the loop taking place where we're actually engaging in dialogue to make it meaningful, right? And so I think that a lot of people need feedback, but you don't always know how to ask for it. So I'm saying, okay, I know it might sound a little cliche, just ask, but I feel like if you give people some tools to know what good looks like to you, give them the opportunity to provide that language to you and see if it's possible, right? Last thing I want to say is there's a statistic out there that says when conflict arises in the workplace, 80% of people will end up leaving their job, even one that they liked, because they don't want to have a conversation. They rather just go find another job. And I'm like, what would it look like if we actually engage and have meaningful conversations about what our needs are to close that expectation gap? And maybe we might get what we want, right? Instead of running away from it, and myself included, don't like to have conflict, but I know that it's been better for me when I engage in sometimes difficult conversations with solutions at the core.
80% is an incredibly high amount. And if we think about that as an attrition rate, or about the cost of replacing people and training people and the whole recruitment thing and the lost, work hours, and that must be, I can't even fathom how much that could add up to, because people, and we are primarily wired to be conflict averse, right? We don't want to go and put ourselves in danger because we don't survive. But that's crazy. And like you say, if people can just take the initiative to say, I'm going to have this difficult conversation, I need to open this dialogue up, that we could potentially save some of that.
Yeah, we could. And changing our mindset, right? To say, this isn't a negative thing. This is actually going to help my capacity to do better work, right? And it's going to help somebody else, hopefully. And now we are on the same page, because I think that's half the battle, right? We have, again, this expectation of each other that nobody has communicated. And so now the trust is low because we've never had a conversation about what you needed from me, right?
I had Jim Moorhead on the show a couple of months ago, and we were talking about bravery because that's what he speaks on. And we're saying about how, like, to me, bravery was running into a burning building to save someone. But to him, bravery is anyone, doing a small act that pushes them outside of their comfort zone and doing something a little different. And I think it's an interesting parallel here. If you've got to have the difficult conversation, the more you do that, the easier it becomes. It's that first time where it feels like you're scaling a mountain. And then afterwards, not saying it ever, it's probably never going to be the funnest thing that you're going to do, but it feels much more manageable and it builds that self-confidence when we speak up more often.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, it takes bravery, it takes courage to address certain things. But also what I think it does too is it normalizes having productive conversations in the workplace, right? And I think going back to what we talked about at the beginning, I think most of us are not having these conversations because we don't have the language for it. So the 7 trust languages are saying, okay, if I get down to the core of where is the trust been misplaced, maybe I just need to be acknowledged for my efforts a little bit more. And what would that look like to ask for that and root it in that acknowledgement? Because I believe that if you tell me that you need more security or transparency from me, if I know that, more than likely, I'm a good human being. I'm going to want to give that to you, right? but if I don't know that you need me to be more transparent, then we're always going to have this conflicting relationship inside the workplace, and you're never going to trust me. But I, again, don't know that that's an issue, right? And I think as managers and leaders, then we get to say, as I get to know and build relationships with the people that report into me, I'm going to find that Minda needs a little more sensitivity for me. I can't make some of those jokes I make with Bob to Minda, right? And so understanding that, and I think that's going to help us in the long run.
And that's where the emotional intelligence piece is going to be huge in the age of AI as well, because as much as it's great to have checklists or, manifestos, it's not quite the same as being able to empathetically read another human being and what they need. When you look back at your own professional journey and you look back at your career before you wrote the book and started the business, which trust language would you say was most lacking for you? What did you crave the most?
That's a great question. I would say probably two things. I would say sensitivity, because I was the only in the workplace. There were a lot of jokes, a lot of, not feeling a sense of belonging, a lot of trying to assimilate into, cultures that may have not seen me as the obvious winner all the time. And so I think that I would have trusted my workplaces a little bit more if I had some managers with a high sense of emotional intelligence, that sensitivity to certain jokes, right? I had a manager who would always I had burnt orange fingernail polish on, and he made jokes about Black people liking bright colors and new people. And he would always make these comments. Now, in his mind, he thought these were funny, right? Just making lighthearted jokes. And at the core of it, I don't think he was trying to be mean to me, but he would say these things and my trust would always go down, 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 down. But I never had the language to be able to say, hey, I understand you might just be playing around, but the impact of these jokes don't make me feel the best, right? I didn't have that language to say that. And I didn't think that I could because of the power dynamics. That's also something that I, cover in the book. But had I had a more sensitive language in the workplace, I think that I would have excelled even more because I wouldn't be questioning every single thing that he was doing and saying. And then I think the other part of that is feedback, right? I think oftentimes when you're in the workplace, there's only a one-way street of feedback, but you don't get to give feedback as well on certain things. So I think that I would have experienced the workplace 10 times more if I would have had the language to say, this is what I needed, because I didn't know how to pinpoint. I didn't know how to articulate what was missing, right? And so I think that my hope is that this next body of work gives people the language to say, okay, 2 things might be true. This person, I don't think he woke up in the morning and said, how can I terrorize Minda with my words every day? I don't think he was doing that, right? But through socialization, people that let other people say jokes, they just think that that's normal. And having these languages, we get to humanize the workplace a little bit more and just remind people of our core values, right? And to make the workplace better than we found it. And so that is my hope. And that is the dream, right? For all of us, introverts and extroverts and ambiverts and all the things that'll come later on, right?
When you think back to the moment in the car that you described so beautifully in the memo, or people can watch now, but when I read that, I know my moment like that. And I've got so many clients and peers that have described their moment of just enough. I just can't anymore. And that almost helpless feeling, but like I'm full, like my languages are not being honored, like enough. At that moment, did you ever dream that not only you would find the words to advocate for yourself, but you would be impacting like hundreds of thousands of other people, if not more, and speaking on stages and working with global organizations to help other people do that? Did that ever cross your mind in the car at that moment?
Not at all. I mean, if you would have told me, you would have popped into the car and knocked out my window and said, Minda, don't worry about this. 5 years later, this is going to look a lot different for you. I would have said, leave me alone. Stop April Foolsing me, right? I would have never guessed. But I feel like I needed to have that moment, that breakdown in the car to say, what's on the other side of this, right? That we can't just accept that the workplace is just, many workplaces are going to be toxic and that we are going to have conflict. And this is just what it is. There has to be something else. And I wanted to be part of that change, right? Because I felt like if I'm having this moment in the car, somebody else is probably having one in the bathroom. Somebody is giving their resignation letter. How do we solve for this? Because we all can't leave our jobs, right? That's just not feasible. And so for me, I'm glad that I found some optimism on the other side, because in that car, I just felt like it was over and I'm just going to have to figure out how to make this work. And I just changed my mindset. And I'm so glad that I did, because again, even someone who liked to sit in the back of the room and only talk when I really had to, it's amazing what we can do back to when we're courageous and when we're brave. And when we realize that let's not just do this for me, but who else can benefit if I do use my voice in a way that's authentic to me.
So once you had picked yourself up and gone down this road of, this body of work that you've been creating over the last 5 years, what was the moment that you thought, oh, I'm onto something here? This is a bit wild. Everyone's resonating with it.
Yeah, I think maybe about a year after the car situation, my little breakdown, I realized I started tapping into different topics that I think were taboo for people to talk about at that time. Even like, for example, I remember I wrote this archaic thing called a blog back in the day. And I talked about mean girls in the office, right? And what does that look like when you're experiencing some of these behaviors? And that was like, at the time, we didn't have the viral language, but that was like a viral post. And I was shocked that other people were experiencing mean people in the workplace, like bullies, essentially. And how many people were then sharing their stories. And I'm like, wait a second. So something that I thought was just happening to me is actually happening to other people. But at that time also, I was talking about how do you navigate these things? And I think for me, allowing people to say, oh, me too, that's an issue here, right? And if you're a manager saying, okay, I do see these behaviors, but I don't know how to address it either. And being able to say, let's talk about these things, because we can't continue to sweep them under the rug. And the more that I started to tap into certain topics that people were like, oh, I didn't have the language for that. Thank you. And I think that was it. And through all the through line of all my work is providing people with feeling seen in that moment. So again, if you don't trust something, and then even going back to my experiences in the workplace, I might not have trusted my manager or trusted my colleague, but what I realized, I was missing one of those 7 languages. And maybe if I had had that language at the time, I could have gone to them and said, actually, I need a little more follow through. And we could have maybe got through it. And in some cases, you ask for what you need, you may not get it. And that's still a win for you, because now you know without a shadow of a doubt, this is not a place for me, right? So it's win-win across the board.
I think our own personal experiences feel so deeply personal. And especially as introverts, because we do internalize things, that when we see someone else talking about the same thing and experiencing it, it is like a huge permission slip. When I niched down and realized that my favorite clients were introverts, and that's who I wanted to work with, and I started this podcast, the feedback that I got was, I feel so seen. I feel exactly like that thing you described. That's how I am as well, in this juxtaposition of, oh, I want to get out there and do big things, but I don't want to be overly loud and exhaust myself in the process. And I think you touched on something there it's the things no one's talking about necessarily and no one's saying that feel very ordinary. And when you share it of like, hey, the mean girl in the office, people are like, oh, that happens everywhere. Okay, it's not me. I'm not the issue.
Yeah, you nailed it.
So going forwards with the future of work, things are changing. We've got hybrid work. We've got AI, growing at an amazing rate. The companies that don't value trust or don't understand the importance of it, what are we going to see happen? Let's fast forward 5-10 years time. We've got a company that, has the trust languages, they're doing the work, they're having the open conversation. We've got the company that is ignorant to it. What differences do you think we're going to see?
I feel like the company that's willing to put trust as the center of everything that they do, they're going to be the company that retains more people. They're going to be the company that experiences the high growth, that they're going to have innovation because they're thinking about what it's like to foster an environment of trust, right? And when you have trust, then you have, again, the retention, you have the profitability, you have all the things that make a business thrive. And for those companies who want to pretend that there's nothing to see here, that we don't have any issues, that everybody trusts everyone, then there's going to be the companies that you see have a lot of lawsuits. They're not going to be innovative. They're going to have a lot of burnout, a lot of retention. And I think that trust, oftentimes we're looking for the $1 million solution and the $1 million initiative. And really, this is about putting humanity and respect back into the workplace. And when we center that, then, back in the day, people used to stay on their jobs for 20, 30 years, right? And now people can barely get through 6 to 8 months because there's no communication, right? There's no trust. There's no transparency. And I think the companies, we have to get back to centering our talent and having a quote unquote open door policy, whether it's hybrid or not, to really give talent what they need and have that mechanism for feedback and transparency. And again, I think the companies that make it to the finish line are the ones who are going to be centering trust. And, funny, I had a friend who had made an introduction to this company saying, hey, I think you should bring Minda in to talk about trust. And they were like, oh, trust isn't an issue here. And I thought, well, I'm going to keep an eye on this company and see if you can trust isn't a problem here. And we have to own that, right? I think a lot of people, trust feels like kind of a dirty word if you don't trust something, right? But let's get underneath of what the reasons are, because there's going to be mistrust because things happen and we're human, right? It's complicated. And I think if we always keep trust as the bar, then it never hits the floor.
What you said about they're looking for the $1 million solution. And in fact, it's just trust. It's just something that is a very human factor. I would say in the last 2 or 3 years, I've seen this more and more. If you look at anyone that's talking about leadership in a very modern way, anyone that's talking about productivity in a very modern way, the things that they're talking about essentially boil down to very human traits. Like I'm here talking about, hey, your energy as an introvert. Seth Matson talking about love. He's talking about, building huge companies, but based on love. We've got people talking about belonging. There are people talking about authenticity, all of these things that kind of got washed out in the 80s and 90s with, very kind of bro leadership and, masculine ways of doing it. And it's lovely to see it come back now to people recognize, oh, it's not working because these things that are human traits that we expect are not present.
I love how you articulated that, because that's what it is. I think we keep going back to the technology. We still need the human touch. We need the human element. And I think that we can't get away from that. So let's just come back to center, right? And start to rework that, because we'll have a better future of work when we get back to humanity of the workplace.
I think that's the perfect place to wrap up. Minda, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise. I'm going to drop all of your links in the show notes. By the time this is released, your book will be out, so we'll have the link to that should anyone want to purchase. But before I let you go, I'm going to ask you what I ask all of my guests who identify as introverts. And that is, you've got a lot going on, you travel a lot, you're speaking a lot, you're using your energy in all of these ways. What is one practice or ritual that is non-negotiable to you because you know it helps you own your energy when you need it?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure having this conversation. Thank you for seeing me as an introvert. I don't think I've ever been invited on a podcast because of my being an introvert, so I appreciate that. But I would say one of the things that I love, especially I used to live in New York City, and so I didn't have a car, so I didn't get a chance. I was always around people in New York City. And so one of the things that I did when I moved to LA, because I do like my downtime and my me time, is I did get a car. And in the car, I make sure if I'm on a long ride that I'm not on the phone, that I get an opportunity just to either listen to music, listen to a podcast, or have silence. And that is my moment. And even when somebody calls me, I'll say, you know what, I'm in the car. I'll give you a call when I'm getting to my destination. And I realized for me, that's my safe space, right? And it goes back to all of the traumas I had in my former life in the car. That was kind of like my breakdown place. And so I've reclaimed my car rides for peace and for energizing myself. And so that's the non-negotiable. And we got to find those little moments where we get to reclaim that time back.
I love it. I love that you've rewritten the script on the car as well after how it all started. Thank you so much once again. And it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into this week's episode. I hope that you're feeling expanded to what's possible for you, motivated to take action, and inspired about how you can start to own your energy. I share even more tools and resources on my Introverts Only email newsletter. By signing up, you not only get early access to the Ambitious Introvert products and services, but you also get brand new podcast episodes delivered straight to your inbox every Monday, meaning you'll never miss your weekly dose of introvert-friendly inspiration. Sign up now at theambitiousintrovert.com/newsletter or click the link in the show notes. See you next week.